This video is made possible by Merrell Science. Get a 25% discount on the first month through the link in the description below using the code BRAINFOOD. More on them in a bit. Ian Fleming, the author who created the most famous spy novel in the English language, James Bond, himself actually worked for a British intelligence service during World War II. Recruited by the Director of Intelligence for the Royal Navy in 1939, Fleming, codenamed 17F, was adept at creating special operations schemes. One of his most famous ploys involved placing misleading documents on a British corpse and then leaving it where Axis soldiers could find it. Another, called Operation GoldenEye, had Fleming establishing an intelligence framework in Spain. By 1942, Fleming led a special operations unit that worked near and behind enemy lines to acquire sensitive documents. It's easy to see the creative minds behind Casino Royale, On Her Majesty's Secret Service, and The Spy Who Loved Me in Fleming's dashing wartime efforts. Moving on, the literary genius behind Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and James and the Giant Peach also worked as a spy during World War II, although many of Roald Dahl's spying efforts seem to have involved in the bedroom rather than in the Situation Room. As newspaper powerhouse Charles Marsh's daughter said, "Girls just fell at Roald's feet. I think he slept with everybody on the east and west coasts that was worth more than $50,000 a year." Dahl had been a flying ace-level fighter pilot who rose to the rank of wing commander for the British. A severe crash eventually resulted in him taking a diplomatic position with the British Embassy in Washington, D.C. in 1942. Dahl quickly became popular with the wealthy wives of powerful men who ran Washington. He was soon recruited to help a secret British effort that was geared surreptitiously bringing the United States further into the war. In addition to helping to secure American popular support, Dahl also engaged in a bit of espionage that included transferring stolen documents and passing on secret information. Next up, we have Noel Coward, the famous playwright who penned Cavalcade and Private Lives. He once said of his spying days, "Celebrity was a wonderful cover." Trained at a secret base in Bletchley Park with Ian Fleming and others, Coward's cleverness, wit, fame, and style enabled him to successfully collect and convey intelligence across 3 continents during World War II. Describing himself as the perfect silly ass, Coward used his persona as a happy playboy to convince those he was spying on that he was a vacuous twit, and he did this to great effect. Throughout the war, he kept in close contact with the Duke and Duchess of Windsor, the former being Edward VIII, who abdicated in 1936 while they stayed in Paris. Both were known to be Nazi sympathizers. Although much of Coward's clandestine work during World War II remains a mystery, it appears that it abruptly came to an end in 1941. According to a rumor, he was found out and placed on a Nazi blacklist of people that would be killed once Germany defeated Britain. Now let's move on to Julia Child. Before she pens the transformative cookbook Mastering the Art of French Cooking, she worked as a top-secret researcher on various projects for the chief of the Office of Strategic Services, the precursor to the CIA. When the US entered World War II, Child tried to volunteer for the Navy's Women Accepted for Volunteer Emergency Service, WAVES, but was rejected due to her height, 6 feet 2 inches, which was 2 inches above the maximum for WAVES. This turned out to be a good thing, as had she been accepted to WAVES, she never would have met her husband, who got her interested in cooking and was her first teacher in the culinary arts. She states before this she didn't really know how to cook at all, as it was cheap to hire a maid and a cook at the time. Rather than WAVES, she eventually found her way to the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, under General William J. Donovan. She began there as a low-level clerk and within a year had risen to senior clerk before volunteering with the Emergency Rescue Equipment Department of the OSS as a research assistant, where she worked on such projects as research into whether soldiers lost at sea could survive on drinking liquids from a fish's body, which Child referred to as the fish squeezing unit. In a similar vein, the Navy was having trouble with sharks eating soldiers from downed ships before rescue operations could be carried out. So Child was put on a team who were coming up with a shark repellent. This was later put in use by the military and also Batman, who would famously use it to save himself while underwater on an alien planet, using it against an angry alien, reasoning that if it works on the killers of the deep on Earth, it might just scare away a similar creature on an alien planet. We mention this because it gives the infamous scene in the 1966 Batman film where Adam West fends off a shark in midair with some handy shark repellent a bit more context. Glorious 1950s era context with pure West. Back to reality though, after finding out they were recruiting people in the OSS to travel to India and China, Child volunteered and was selected to go in 1944. While in the Far East, she became the head of the Registry of the OSS Secretariat and was granted high security clearance, with her primary job being to organize, relay, and track various top-secret documents and information funneled to and from the OSS. As Air Force Intelligence Officer Byron Martin stated about Child, she was privy to every top secret, a person of unquestioned loyalty, of rock-solid integrity, of unblemished lifestyle, and of keen intelligence. Near the end of the war, Child was targeted to actually become a fully fledged field spy herself instead of just working behind the scenes, as she had a particularly adventurous spirit and had proven herself exceptionally trustworthy. But before she could be used in the field, the war ended abruptly shortly after the dropping of those nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So moving on to someone who had extensive field spy experience, we have Major League Baseball player Morris Mo Berg, who was originally recruited to the OSS in August of 1943 when he was 41 years old and had been retired from baseball for about 4 years. At the time of his retirement, he had been working for the Office of Internal American Affairs, stationed primarily in South America, with his job being to monitor the physical fitness levels of US troops there. The OSS recruited him primarily for his ability to fluently speak multiple languages with little to no accent. Among the languages he spoke were German, Italian, French, Spanish, Japanese, Greek, Russian, Hebrew, Sanskrit, and Latin, among others. At first, Berg primarily served as an operations officer, but was soon recruited into the Secret Intelligence Division of the OSS. In this position, Berg was often parachuted behind enemy lines to fulfill his various missions, such as evaluating which resistance groups were most effective and providing them aid through the OSS. For instance, he was once dropped into occupied Norway, where he established contact with the Norwegian guerrilla fighters. While there, he helped them destroy a German facility that was attempting to build an atomic bomb. He was also sent to the Soviet Union on a few intelligence-gathering missions. Another interesting mission, which was his last with the OSS, was Project Larsen, which was one where he was trained in nuclear physics so that he could pose as a Swiss physicist. During this mission, he was tasked with trying to convince various top European physicists and engineers to move to the United States, as well as try to buddy up to them in order to gather information. Principal among his information-gathering goals was to learn everything he could about certain key German physicists such as Carl Friedrich von Weizsäcker and Werner Heisenberg, the head of Germany's atomic bomb project. The US particularly wanted information on how far along Germany was in the development of a nuclear weapon. Nearing the end of this mission in 1944, he was sent to a lecture given by Heisenberg in Switzerland. At this lecture, he was to determine from it whether Germany was close to being able to create a nuclear bomb. If, after Heisenberg's lecture, Berg felt the Germans were close, he had instructions to murder Heisenberg, and if he wasn't able to escape after the assassination, to take a cyanide pill to avoid being interrogated. Luckily for Heisenberg, and possibly for Berg, he didn't think the Germans were close, and so didn't attempt to kill him. Although one would think most would come up with that assessment if the price of concluding they were close was then to murder someone and then possibly have to commit suicide afterwards. Berg continued traveling around Europe, gathering information for another 4 months before returning to the US and resigning from the OSS. 6 years later, after turning down 2 offers to coach for the White Sox and Red Sox, the latter team, which he had already once helped coach for 2 years, Berg attempted to join the CIA, particularly wanting to be sent to Israel, as he was Jewish, but his request was denied. However, a year later, the CIA did hire him, wanting to re-establish contact with various acquaintances of his in Europe in order to gather information for the US on the Soviet Union, particularly on their nuclear program. Berg accepted this mission, but supposedly ultimately did nothing but take the $10,000 offered to him, about $100,000 today, providing no information to the CIA, and he was subsequently let go after 2 years. Previous to becoming an agent for the OSS, it is thought by some of his biographers that Berg may have already been involved in spying for the US, though he has always denied this. For instance, while still a baseball player, he was invited to join with Major League Baseball all-stars such as Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig to travel to Japan. This was actually Berg's second such trip to Japan, the first of which he stayed behind after the other players left and spent a couple of months traveling around China, Japan, Siam, India, Egypt, and Berlin, among other places. What makes his selection for the second trip to Japan even more curious is that Berg was a pretty mediocre player and all the others invited were all-stars. Further, while in Japan the second time, Berg bluffed his way into the tallest building in Tokyo, a hospital, and managed to sneak onto the roof. He had a motion picture camera hidden with him, and he managed to get shots of all of Tokyo, which were later given to the US government. Particularly these shots were later used by the US when planning bombing raids on Tokyo during World War II. Once again, after the other players left to return to the US, he stayed behind and this time traveled to the Philippines, Korea, and Moscow. He also conspicuously traveled a lot to other countries in the off-season, such as spending one off-season in Paris as an academic student instead of working on his hitting, as he was supposed to be doing. All this has given rise to rumors that he had been actively spying for the US long before he retired, though again, he always denied this claim, and there is very little direct evidence other than the taking of the film of Tokyo. And indeed, he might have just been filming this for fun. Further, Berg later stated he only offered the footage he had taken of Tokyo to the US after he was hired on with the OSS, and they had never previously known about it. Whatever the case, next up we have Charles Lucky Luciano, the famous mafioso and head of the Genovese family who answered the call when Uncle Sam needed help during World War II. Fearing Axis agents would surreptitiously enter the country on ships and even potentially sabotage US efforts, the Navy knew it had to have excellent intelligence about the comings and goings on the New York waterfront. Unfortunately, neither the civil authorities nor the police fully controlled the port of New York. La Cosa Nostra did. Never one to put principle before practice, the Navy negotiated a deal with Luciano, who was in prison at the time in 1941. Luciano reportedly ensured that the Navy had the best intelligence from the docks, and by some accounts that there would be no strikes until the war ended. In fact, there is rumor that Luciano helped American military personnel establish contacts with the mafioso in Sicily prior to the invasion. Of course, no leopard can change his spots, and Luciano kept with his criminal enterprise until his death in Italy in 1962. Moving on from mobster to Hollywood beauty, best known as a movie actress, having starred in such classic movies as Sabrina, Funny Face, Breakfast at Tiffany's, My Fair Lady, and Roman Holiday, for which she won the Academy Award for Best Actress, Audrey Hepburn had a fascinating, if tumultuous, upbringing. Her mother was a Dutch baroness, and her father was a British businessman. As a result, she spent her childhood bouncing between Belgium, England, and the Netherlands. In 1939, shortly after the start of World War II, Hepburn's mother moved the family back to the Netherlands in the mistaken belief that the country, which had remained neutral and free from the devastation of World War I, would not be drawn into the conflict. Obviously, she was mistaken. The country was occupied by the Germans in 1940. By 1944, they had executed Hepburn's uncle, one of her brothers was in a labor camp, and the other had gone into hiding. Hepburn was still a young teenager when she began to help the Dutch resistance. An accomplished ballerina by age 14, she started out helping the resistance not by any spying activities, but rather by dancing. And how was this helpful? Well, she danced in secret productions to raise money for the resistance. As she famously said, "The best audience I ever had made not a single sound at the end of my performances." Not limited to dancing, the young Hepburn also ran intelligence messages for the resistance on the side. Had she been discovered doing either of these things, a swift execution would have followed. Finally, we have the man who was perhaps the most inept of all celebrity spies and whose stint as a clandestine information gatherer lasted almost no time at all, and that's the creator of Dennis the Menace, Hank Ketchum. In 1959, Ketchum was invited to visit the Soviet Union as part of a cartoon exchange trip. Never one to miss an opportunity, the CIA asked Ketchum if he wouldn't mind using his artistic skills to sketch anything significant he saw while in the Soviet Union and to pass those drawings back to them. Said Ketchum, "We were flying from Moscow to Kiev, and it was during the day, and I looked out of the window and saw some shapes. I had my sketchbook, and I would put them down, and the flight attendant would walk by, and I would put a big nose and some eyes and make the whole thing into a funny face. So I had a whole book of funny face cartoons at the end that I didn't know how to read." Needless to say, the CIA didn't exactly appreciate his work, and his spying days more or less ended before they had begun. Just before we get into the bonus facts today, I do want to tell you a bit about Merrell Science. Merrell Science is an amazing subscription for safe and fun experiments for kids to do at home. It also comes as a subscription, so you don't have to think about organizing it or going to the store, anything like that. Merrell Science comes in 2 flavors, chemistry and kids. Chemistry comes with a starter kit and is for ages 10+. They sent me a kit for me to play around with. It had 3 experiments. I've got one of them in front of me right now, so I think I've got kid-sized gloves. So you get this little instruction booklet right there. What we're gonna do, pour the solution until it starts dripping from the bottom. So this is what we're doing is an iron sulfate solution, FeSO4. What we're going to do is we're going to just pour that until this starts dripping from the bottom. Okay, this has definitely started to drip from the bottom, so what we're going to do is we put it in this marker, like so. Now what I want to do is put 20 drops into my beaker. That's about 20 drops. For 2 to 3 minutes. Through the magic of television, it's 2 to 3 minutes later now. Okay, and then what we want to do is we want to take our paper over here. I'm going to write a message on it. Okay. I hope my penmanship was good enough because I cannot see that at all. Take this tannin solution. Let's give this a go, shall we? 5 to 7 drops. And then you just apply it to the whole paper, apparently. Hey! Okay, that's actually pretty exciting. Oh, that's cool. And now, boom. Just like that. Merrell Science. Check them out through the link in the description below. Use the code BRAINFOOD for a 25% discount, and let's get into those bonus facts. Speaking of celebrities contributing to the war effort, James Doohan was shot 6 times on D-Day, but not by enemy soldiers. After leading some of his fellow Canadian soldiers through a minefield on Juno Beach and personally taking out 2 German snipers in the process, his unit secured their position for the night. Doohan was crossing between command posts when a Canadian gunman spotted him and opened fire. And so it was that Doohan took 4 rounds in one of his legs, 1 in his hands, which ultimately resulted in him losing his middle finger, and 1 in the chest. The shot to the chest likely would have been fatal, except he had a silver cigarette case there given to him by his brother, which deflected the bullet. He would later give up smoking, but at least he could say that being a smoker had actually saved his life. As for actor Jimmy Stewart, in 1940, Stewart was drafted into the United States Army, but ended up being rejected due to being 5 pounds under the required weight, given his height. At the time he weighed 143 pounds. Not to be dissuaded, Stewart then sought out the help of Don Loomis, who was known to be able to help people add or subtract pounds. Once he gained a little weight, he enlisted with the Army Air Corps in March of 1941, and was eventually accepted, once he convinced the enlisting officer to rerun the tests. Initially, Stewart was given the rank of private, but by the time he had completed training, he advanced to the rank of second lieutenant. That was in January of 1942. Much to his chagrin, due to his celebrity status and extensive flight experience, having tallied over 400 flight hours before even joining the military, Stewart was initially assigned to various behind-the-lines type duties, such as training pilots and making promotional videos in the States. Eventually, when he realized they were never going to put him on the front line, he appealed to his commanding officer and managed to get himself assigned to a unit overseas. In August of 1943, he found himself with the 703rd Bombardment Squadron, initially as a first officer, and shortly thereafter as a captain. During combat operations over Germany, Stewart found himself promoted to the rank of major. During this time, Stewart participated in several uncounted missions on his orders into Nazi-occupied Europe, flying his B-24 in the lead position of his group in order to inspire his troops. For his bravery during these missions, he twice received the Distinguished Flying Cross, 3 times received the Air Medal, and once received the Croix de Guerre from the French. This latter medal was an award given by France and Belgium to individuals allied with themselves who distinguished themselves with acts of heroism. By July of 1944, Stewart was promoted to Chief of Staff of the 2nd Combat Bombardment Wing of the 8th Air Force. Shortly thereafter, he was promoted to the rank of colonel, becoming one of only a handful of American soldiers to ever rise from private to colonel within a 4-year span. After the war, Stewart was an active part of the United States Air Force Reserve, serving as the reserve commander of Dobbins Air Reserve Base. On July 24th, 1959, he attained the rank of Brigadier General. That's a 1-star general. During the Vietnam War, he flew in a B-52 on a bombing mission and otherwise continued to fulfill his duty within the Air Force Reserve. He finally retired from the Air Force on May 31st, 1968, after 27 years of service, and was subsequently promoted to Major General. That's a 2-star general. So, I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below, and do not forget to subscribe. Brand new videos just like this every day of the week. And also, please do check out our fantastic sponsor, Merrell Science, 25% off. Use the code BRAINFOOD. There is a link below. And as always, thank you for watching.